going to advise those in the public gallery that they're welcome to use mobile devices if they are in airplane mode, and that all devices are to be muted. It's not permitted to take photographs or record any part of the meeting. Clerk, in terms of apologies, do we have any apologies?
No.
Not at this moment in time. And anybody attending via Zoom?
I think
Aoife's said she's waiting on a link.
Waiting for a link.
Okay,
Yeah.
no problem. We'll get Michael to sort that out, okay? Then declarations of interest. I will remind you of your responsibility to declare any interest in any of the items under discussion today. Does any member have any interest to declare in relation to any of today's agenda items?
NC Private Members Bill.
Thank you. Declan? Okay. And John?
Chair the Hunting the Dogs Bill.
Brilliant. Thank you. Chairperson's business then is agenda item 3, members. I refer you to page 6 of the pack to a draft reply to Solace in response to the correspondence we considered at our meeting last week regarding its ongoing concerns in respect of the dilapidation bill. The draft responses outline the committee's extensive efforts to facilitate and respond to stakeholder input and address some specific points raised. Do members have any comments, or are members content to issue the letter as drafted? I'm going to give you a minute or two just to read over the letter, just to make sure you're content. I think it is worthy of the response, and I'm certainly content with the letter as drafted, but just want to make sure you're content with that, members. And if you are content, you can just please do indicate. There has been extensive work by this committee and our support staff in regards to this bill, and basically the letter reflects that.
Yep.
Members content?
Happy, yep.
Thank you, members. Okay. Agenda item 2 is agenda item 2, 3 and 4 are going to be taken together. So refer you to the pack to page 10, the notification from the clerk to the Committee for Education on 2 forthcoming private members' bills in which work has begun on the committee stage. The first one is the Education Holiday Meal Payments Bill, and the second is the Irish Medium Education Workforce Plan Bill. The Education Committee would be grateful for any input and views the committee would wish to make, and has sent us the raised bill papers for assistance starting at page 11 and 74 of the pack respectively. The deadline for a response is noted as the 15th of May. However, given we were completing the dilapidation bill that week and attending Balmoral, the clerk of that committee is content we respond past the deadline. So I refer you to the pack starting at page 11 to the raised briefing paper on the Education Holiday Meal Payment Bill. The bill seeks to address the issue of holiday hunger by placing a statutory duty on the Minister for Education to provide direct payments to parents of pupils entitled to free school meals during all school holiday periods and exceptional closure days. The bill contains 4 clauses in one schedule and is designed to replicate the approach taken during the school holiday food grant scheme, which was introduced in 2020. The bill is set against the backdrop of rising food insecurity in Northern Ireland and highlights the wide-ranging impacts of food insecurity on children's physical, mental and educational outcomes. Food security is a theme that the committee have covered in terms of the rising cost of fuel and fertilisers and the knock-on effect on food prices, particularly in rural areas. Members, have you any comments, or are you content that the clerk responds to highlight our concerns in that regard and to request that the Committee for Education scrutinise those matters? Yep, content. Thank you, members. Secondly, I refer you to the pack starting on page 74 to the raised briefing paper on the Irish Medium Education Workforce Plan Bill. This is a 2-clause bill. Clause 1 would insert new Article 89ZA into the Education Northern Ireland Order 1998, placing the duty on the Department of Education to prepare, publish and lay before the Assembly a strategic workforce plan for the Irish medium education sector. As members are aware, the Rural Needs Act NI 2016 places a statutory obligation on public authorities to have due regard to rural needs in policy development and service delivery. In considering the bill, we may wish to request that the Education Committee examine whether the proposed expansion of provision has been appropriately rural-proofed, including its impact on access to education, rural inequalities and sustainability of rural communities. So have you any comments? Or are you content that the clerk responds to highlight our concerns in that regard and to request that the Committee for Education scrutinise those matters? Thank you, members. Item number 5 then, I refer you to page 102 of the pack to further correspondence dated the 18th of May from an individual regarding allegation of pollution to the River Ridge site at Craigmore Road. Members, I just remind you of the scrutiny we've already done in the matter of odour management, having received correspondence from a number of individuals on similar matters. We took a briefing from RAISE on the 18th of September 25 regarding the sniff test used by NIEA and other authorities across neighbouring jurisdictions. The committee agreed to pursue the matter further, and we wrote to local authorities to request information relating to overdose complaints. 8 council responses were received and were considered at committee on the 27th of November 2025. We noted that the responses indicated that much of the processes of investigation are standard, as is the concern that self-testing is unreliable. Also, that there does appear to be some shared concerns regarding duplication of work and communication between investigating bodies. We considered further correspondence on the 22nd of January 26, recognised and agreed to write to NIEA to encourage it to progress its own review on odour management, given that the UK Environment Agency had completed its own review. We considered a departmental response to our request for an update on odour guidance at our meeting on the 5th of March, and we have noted that a project has begun to produce updated NIEA odour guidance by reviewing other odour guidance available, including by the Scottish EPA and the Irish EPA. And in the meantime, NIEA will continue to use the previous version of the UK H4 odour management guidance, as well as the 2012 NIE guidance. Have you any comments on this most recent correspondence, or are you content to note? Thank you, members. Item number 6 referred to pack at page 105 to a briefing paper from the RSPB on anaerobic digestion and biomethane. The RSPB were invited to our ID event on Thursday the 4th of June, which is next week, guys, but are unable to send a representative and have offered to brief the committee on the paper at a later date. Have you any comments, or are you content to note and add to our list of potential briefings?
Note.
I'm just going to ask to make sure that the diary invite has been issued to you guys to hold that date and time in your diary for next week. Thank you. Item number 7 then, I refer you to table papers at page 4 to a note of the informal meetings with the Bonds Glen Environmental Group on Tuesday of this week to discuss what they have described as the destruction of the Sperrin AONB and the special areas of conservation. The committee first considered the issue on the 26th of February when it considered correspondence from the group, and we agreed to write to the department to request clarity from NIEA on the situation and also further details regarding engagement on the matter with Derry and Strabane City Council, District Council. On the 19th of March, we considered the response from the department and noted that site inspections conducted in October 25 by the Natural Environment Division, the Environmental Crime Unit and the Water Catchment Unit found no legislative breaches. However, notifications have been issued to the Lochs Agency due to the proximity of the River Fawn, DERA Forestry Service due to claims of unlicensed tree felling, and the Department of Infrastructure's Rivers Agency in response to allegations of diverting and culverting watercourses. We heard on Tuesday from Bonds Glen that in March 2026, Derry City and Strabane District Council issued enforcement notices for the site owner to carry out restoration works due to unauthorised excavation carried out in the site. The group state that this has not yet been done. Have you any comments or any further actions for the committee to take?
I think we're happy that the committee's writing to NIEA for clarity, because the difference in opinion between NIEA and the enforcement and planning on council is, it's as different as day and night between the two views on the thing. NIEA says there's no case to answer, and yet the council enforcement has put enforcement on that there's a lot of things needs to be reinstated again. So we do need clarity from NIEA as to what's going on here.
Members content with that?
Yeah, I just declare an interest in that as well. I've been including some of the correspondence directly as an MLA for the area. So.
Okay, members, are you happy with that, Clerk? Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Daniel. So, on table papers at page 6 for the bill of us, notification that the Hunting with Dogs bill passed second stage on Tuesday. As a result, committee stage commences today, and the last day of committee stage at the moment is scheduled to be September 2026, by which time the committee should let its report unless the committee seeks and is granted an extension. So, John, we'll return to that matter later when John returns from making his call. Is that okay, members? Happy enough to do that? Agenda item 4, minutes of the meeting on the 21st of May then. Referred to page 108 of the pack to draft minutes from our meeting dated the 21st of May. If you have any comments, are you content with the minutes as drafted? And if so, I will sign them for publishing on the website. Okay, members, thank you. I also refer you to page 8 of the table papers to the draft minutes from the joint concurrent meeting with the Committee for Infrastructure Communities regarding the Sustainable Places programme, which took place on the 21st of May. Members, have any comments? Are you content with the minutes as drafted? Thank you, members. Agenda item 5 is matters arising. Item number 1, page 119 of your pack, to response from the department dated 18th of May regarding our queries raised on the 7th of May concerning the Farming with Nature Scheme Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2026. In response to our request for clarification of the definition of permanent grassland sensitive areas and the possible effect on areas with natural constraint, the department states these are areas with protected habitats under the Habitats and Birds Directive due to their importance for biodiversity, carbon storage, water quality and wildlife, and are found in both upland and lowland areas. As such, activities like ploughing, reseeding or changing land use are prohibited to prevent environmental damage. The department states that future strands of the Farming with Nature package will provide support to protect and manage these areas, including those within areas with natural constraint. In response to our query regarding semi-permanent or rotational fencing, the department advises that 3 field margin actions are proposed for the scheme in 2026, restricted to areas under arable production where the main crop is cereal and not grazed by livestock. As there is therefore no operational requirement for fencing to support the implementation of these actions, fencing will not be eligible for support. So, members, are there any comments, or are you content to note? Content to note at this stage? Okay, members. John, I'm going to just return here. I just read in there the item in regard to the hunting with dogs passing the second stage yesterday. I also read in that at the moment the committee stage is due to end on the 2nd of September, by which time the committee should lay its report, but that the committee is likely to seek an extension, but that'll be brought at the next meeting. So have you anything that you want to say at this stage, or are you happy enough that we return to it?
Happy if we return to it the next meeting.
Okay, no, I appreciate that.
I'll be sending some information over, Chair, in the meantime, regarding consultations and those that have already been consulted by myself.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Okay, matters rising number 2 then, referred to the pack, page 122, to a memo dated the 22nd of May from the Clerk to the Committee for Economy in response to our request for work undertaken by that committee in relation to maritime fuel supply and costs. The response states that it has not completed any work in this regard and is unlikely to have capacity to do so in the current mandate. We have also agreed to write to the Minister to ask if the Department are working collaboratively with the Department for the Economy and maritime industry stakeholders and operators in respect of rising fuel costs. We await a response from the department and will consider a response from the UK Chamber of Shipping at the next meeting. Yeah.
No, it's next matter. Right?
Yeah, the next matters arising. I thought there was a typo.
No.
Okay, thank you. Members, item number 3 then, I refer you to packet page 124 to the response from the UK Chamber of Maritime Shipping dated 22nd of May regarding the impacts of global economic events on the maritime industry. The response states that their immediate concern is not physical disruption to fuel supply, but the entrenchment of higher prices, greater volatility and wider cost pressures across transport and agricultural supply chains. They also state that maritime fuel costs have direct implications for agri-food producers and operators who are exposed to global price movements that cannot be mitigated in the short term. The response also states that rising energy costs, labour constraints and tighter financing conditions are increasing pressures as decarbonisation alternatives and infrastructure remain limited. The Chamber has offered to provide further oral evidence to the Committee or provide any additional information or clarification in writing if required. And this feeds back to a previous debate we had in and around the emission rules and the change that affected them there, guys. So I think we certainly want to keep it, not suggesting we take any further evidence at this oral evidence, but certainly want to keep the door open because from my perspective there is a direct implication on food inflation, the price of food going forward, given the fact that the evidence that they'd given us previously about the level of import and exports that we're reliant on here, both for the economy and also for food prices. So are you content that we keep a watching brief on that one and we can return to it? Yep. Thank you, members. Item number 4 then, I refer you to table papers at page 14 to the response from the department dated the 26th of May regarding our request for an update on the ammonia strategy and nutrients action plan. The department states that the proposed 2 mandatory measures, the phased introduction of low emission slurry spreading, otherwise known as LESI, and constraints on the use of granular urea fertilisers unless they contain urease inhibitors, continue to be considered as part of the ongoing work of the NAP Stakeholder Task and Finish Group, which we are told is nearing completion. Then, following ministerial consideration, the updated NAP proposals will be issued for an 8-week consultation to inform the final version of the ammonia strategy and the nutrients action plan. Will then be submitted to the executive for approval. Have you any comments you content to note, members? Okay, thank you. Okay, agenda item 6 then is the departmental oral evidence session, the SL1, the Cattle Identification Number 2 Amendment Regulations, Northern Ireland 2026. I refer you to the pack for the following papers: the SL1 Clark Scrutiny Memo dated the 22nd of May, which is at page 132. The SL1 letter dated the 31st of March at page 135, and the draft SR and then the explanatory memorandum start at page 140. The department submitted the above SL1 and draft SR to the committee on the 31st of March to advise of its intention to make a new regulation under the negative resolution procedure to introduce minor technical amendments to existing domestic cattle identification legislation to enable the voluntary implementation of electronic identification of cattle in Northern Ireland. At our meeting on the 16th of April, the committee agreed to receive an oral briefing from DAERA officials today and to issue a call for views using the Citizen Space platform, which received no responses. I now welcome the following officials to brief the committee and answer any questions that we have. We have Mr Neil Gartland, the Director of Animal Health and Welfare Policy, Mr Christopher Andrews, Deputy Director of Animal Health and Welfare Policy, and Mr Darren Fullerton, Head of Livestock Identification and Terminal Products Policy. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Please feel free to brief the committee. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chair, and good morning to you members of the committee. I welcome the opportunity to brief the committee on the statutory rule, the Cattle Identification No. 2 Amendment Regulations, Northern Ireland 2026, which enables the voluntary introduction of electronic identification, or EID, for cattle here. As I have outlined, I'm joined today by Christopher Andrews, Deputy Director of Animal Health and Welfare Policy, and Darren Fullerton, Head of Livestock ID Policy, who, along with myself, will seek to answer any questions committee members may have after these brief opening remarks. Members have already received the detailed written briefing, so I will endeavour to keep my remarks short and to the point. Currently, cattle in Northern Ireland are identified using conventional ear tags, which display a unique identification number, which is read visually. To be clear, this SR today will still permit this to remain, but only allows a completely optional choice of an EID tag should farmers and herd keepers wish to do so. The system underpins our traceability regime and supports the recording of births, deaths, movements and information about disease testing. Identification regime is well established, functional and understood by those who use it. However, it is widely recognised that EID offers opportunities to simplify the capture and recording of animal information by reducing errors associated by misreading visual tags and improving efficiency across farms, markets and abattoirs. Electronic identification is simply a different way of identifying animals and recording their identification number. In basic terms, the ear tag contains a microchip which stores the unique ID number. This number can then be read automatically using compatible equipment such as a tag reader. This eliminates the need for a person to read across and record the number manually, which reduces transcription errors and the need to handle the animal. Northern Ireland is aligned to European rules for livestock identification, which states that the use of EID is optional. However, where EID is used, European legislation sets out the specific technical standards which must be used. For cattle, this means using low-frequency EID devices. Low-frequency EID has been used to identify sheep in Northern Ireland already and the rest of the UK since 2010. There is also the same technical standard used already by the Republic of Ireland to identify cattle since 2022, and this is the technology that England and Wales have committed to adopting when they intend to roll out EID on a mandatory basis for newborn cattle sometime in 2027. On the other hand, Scotland has indicated its intention to introduce EID from 2027, but using high-frequency technology. So what this statutory rule, what this statutory rule does. The committee will be aware that there has been a recent consultation on proposals for mandatory EID in Northern Ireland. It is important to note that this is an entirely separate initiative. To be clear, the statutory rule before you today does not make EID mandatory. It introduces no new obligations for herd keepers and does not preempt any future decision on the prospect of making EID for cattle mandatory. We will, of course, provide separate briefing to members on that consultation once responses have been fully considered and any subsequent ministerial decisions have been made as necessary. Rather, this piece of legislation makes minor technical amendments to existing domestic cattle identification regulations. These changes will enable keepers to choose to use EID ear tags only if they wish to do so. I want to emphasise the decision to use EID will rest entirely with the herd keeper. The Department considers a voluntary approach to be appropriate at this stage for four main reasons. Excuse me. The Department considers a voluntary approach to be appropriate at this stage for four main reasons. First, as I have stated, struggling today. First, as I have stated, it provides choice and flexibility, allowing those who want to adopt EID to do so without imposing change on the rest of industry. Second, it responds to requests from parts of the wider food agri-sector to facilitate the introduction of official EID devices. Third, it supports a phased transition should Northern Ireland move to mandatory EID for newborn cattle in the future, although no decision has been taken on this matter, and this has only recently been consulted on. This would give industry time to adapt, invest in equipment if needed, and observe the benefits in practice. And finally, it complements the bovine genetics project, which is expected to roll out from September. Therefore, tissue sampling tags under this project would also incorporate EID functionality for those who wish to use it. It is important to be clear about both the benefits and costs of voluntary EID. The use of EID can improve the efficiency and accuracy of livestock identification by reducing reliance on the manual reading and recording of tag numbers. In practice, this means less handling of animals at key points in the supply chain, including on farms, at abattoirs, at markets, with benefits for animal welfare and the health and safety of those handling cattle. Alongside electronic reporting, it can also improve traceability and support a faster, more accurate response to disease outbreaks, with benefits for public health and consumer confidence. Beyond identification and traceability, EID can also enable technology such as automated calf feeding, in-parlour feeding, milk recording, robotic milking and weight monitoring systems. Integrating this technology into daily operations can improve herd management, for example by supporting weight tracking, informing sale or feeding decisions, and enable faster identification of health issues. However, these benefits primarily arise for those herd keepers who choose to adopt the technology. There are cost considerations, but again, these apply to only those who choose to adopt EID, as this SR today only brings in the option of using EID on a completely voluntary basis. The primary additional cost of the EID tag itself, estimated at £150 to £2 more than a conventional tag. There's no requirement to purchase readers or other equipment, and equipment already used for EID for sheep should be compatible with cattle. For the department, costs are limited to minor system updates, estimated at around £10,000. While individual benefits may outweigh costs for adopters, it is generally accepted that the full industry-wide benefits of EID will only be realised when adoption becomes more widespread. This is likely to be over several years and potentially following any future move to mandatory use for newborn calves, if this is a policy that DAERA and the Minister determine to advance in the future. As noted earlier, the statutory rule enables voluntary uptake only and introduces no new obligations. As such, formal public consultation is not required. Engagement has taken place with industry as part of the wider consultation of mandatory EID. Overall, there's been broad support for the EID in that consultation, albeit with some concerns regarding potential additional tag costs if introduced on a mandatory basis in the future. To conclude, the statutory rule enables the voluntary use of EID in Northern Ireland for cattle. It is a proportionate and low-risk change that provides choice, supports innovation and allows industry to adopt new technology at its own pace. It introduces no new requirements on herd keepers and does not preempt any future decisions on mandatory EID. Thank you, Chair, and we're happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could you talk me through the process? Because you said there that there's no need for on-farm readers. So could you talk me through the process then for particularly a small farmer who potentially wants to do it? How that happens? Because it's more of a digital. I imagine it's more of a way of capturing the digital information. And does the APHIS system then already is it already enabled to take the data?
Bringing Chris in terms of the operational, is that okay?
Yeah, for a small, I've now got it.
You need to put each other in the back there.
For a small farmer, they can still record tags and send movements to the department as normal on paper by just reading the tag visually and notating that down. I think we'd be sort of quite upfront that the immediate efficiencies and benefits will be when it comes to bringing animals to market or to abattoirs where technology can be used then to process those animals really, really quickly by just scanning them automatically. So that's really sort of the differential. We've obviously said there in the briefing, Chair, that there would be a number of farmers already across Northern Ireland who would be familiar with EID. They tend to be bigger herds. They would tend to be herds in the dairy sector. So I don't think as it stands we would be expecting widespread uptake from smaller herd keepers, and that's why it's obviously voluntary. It's a decision for people to make. Probably in the first instance would be something that those farmers who are progressive or sort of technology orientated will try to latch on to, or who already have some of that technology already.
Just the really basic questions, but trying to get a picture of this. This tag, if it's used, there'll be no need for the historic tag, is that right? Or does the farmer need to use two?
So there'll still be a requirement to have two tags. So there'll be a conventional plastic tag with a printed number, and then there'll be an electronic tag with a microchip, which will also have a visual number on it as well. So if you have the equipment, you'll be able to scan your animal and it'll record the number if you have the equipment. If you don't have the equipment, you will still have the conventional plastic tags with your unique identification number printed on it.
So at the moment, there's if you don't volunteer, there's just one tag at the moment?
You will just have two conventional plastic tags,
Two conventional plastic,
yeah.
So now it'll be one conventional and one... Okay,
On
so
one
I'm trying to
chip.
tease out to make sure it is just an additional cost of £150 or £2 and not an additional tag, which is not the same thing.
Yeah, no, so all animals at the minute have two tags,
Okay.
so you'll be given the choice to change your one of the tags from a conventional plastic tag to an electronic identification tag if you want to do that.
And a couple of things then. So this is mandatory in the Republic at the moment,
Right.
and it's anticipated that will be mandatory in the rest of GB?
Yes.
So all of GB?
Yeah, so cattle identification across England, Scotland and Wales has devolved, so they all make their own decisions, but they are all intending to introduce some form of mandatory EID from about 2027.
And then the final one for me, is there any sense of a cost recovery for a farmer wanting to participate in the scheme?
Not at the moment, not at present, because it's on a voluntary optional basis. We do know that there were concerns raised in the consultation around the mandatory introduction, and of course that's something that will have to be considered when we come to advise the Minister for any future decisions on that. But given the optional nature of this here, there's no cost recovery as part of this SR today.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. And should declare that just as an owner of a few Angus cattle with fancy yellow tags.
Small herd, is what you said?
Do you see, will the technology be possibly developed in the future that you could perhaps use an iPhone to scan the tag? Would that be something that could come in the future to make it really convenient on in the field?
I haven't heard in terms of any of our engagement that that's a potential. I'm sure with all IT development and technological developments it's something they may look at, but at the moment you need to have a reader, as I understand.
Yeah, it's potentially like the reader itself could link up to like an iPhone or whatever, because in the likes of the markets and the public, they would have a small iPad or whatever, and then they'd be walking down and actually reading the numbers, and then it's showing up on their iPad or whatever.
As you can see how convenient it is nowadays for QR codes to be used by the iPhone for all sorts of reasons. The post other question: will this the fact that it's mandatory in the south of Ireland, and if we can bring it in here, will this make it an easier flow for cattle to flow north and south? Would it make it easier in terms of north-south movement of cattle?
I think the big advantage there is if a farmer from the north decides to electronically identifies their cattle and then decides to take them to a market in the south where they already have this technology in place, it is totally interoperable, so the animals will be read automatically at that market in the south. It'll not negate the need to do movement reporting and all the other sort of documentation that goes with moving cattle from north to south, but certainly we will all be using the same technology. It's all the same standards, so there will be some sort of minor efficiencies, but I wouldn't want to say it will definitely remove any of those paper-based requirements that exist now. There'll still be a need for health certificates and movement documents and things like that.
Yeah. And that actually was my next question. The systems north and south would be integrated, or?
Yeah, so it's absolutely exactly the same technology. It's low-frequency technology, so the same devices that we are putting in cattle ears are the same devices that they're putting in cattle ears. It'll be the same technology and the same style of technology that they will have in markets and abattoirs that will be used in markets and abattoirs here.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Any further questions, members? Nope. Yes, Gareth?
I suppose just in terms of the security aspect for farmers and limitations of opportunity for malpractice, I suppose, or any sort of fraud in terms of cattle and movements and that, does that tighten that all up because it's electronic and it's more difficult to tamper with? Is that the view, or how would you view that, or is it purely just from the ease of reading the number on that?
I would be very hesitant to say it would sort of transform or tighten up fraud. At the end of the day, it's just a tag, and if somebody wants to do something nefarious or dodgy with that tag, they can still do that. They can still try and break it open and replace it. It's more about trying to generate efficiencies when reading the tag, and it's really the error reduction as well. It's the going away or trying to move away from manually transcribing numbers.
And then the loading in of that number, is that something the department itself will be doing? That technological bit of it, is that?
So the number on the chip has to conform to sort of an international standard. That number is obviously allocated by the department as well and encoded on the chip, and that can only be produced by tag printers and manufacturers authorised by the department.
So that bit's...
Yeah, so you couldn't go on to, for example, a third-party overseas site and order up a load of tags or things like that. You have to use official tags from official tag suppliers authorised by DAERA, who are then connected to the NIFIS system.
Thomas?
Yeah. It's voluntary at the minute. Do you see it becoming mandatory in future days?
We're considering the consultation responses off the back of the consultation, which asked around views for mandatory introduction. There's been no decision on that yet, so we imagine that the Minister will have final advice in the autumn for a future decision, and if a decision is made to introduce it, we'll be back obviously to see you and update you on that, but no decision has yet been made on that basis.
Anything else, Chair? No? We final one from me, if that's okay. Just what assurance can the Department provide that the system will be ready for implementation in July 2026?
Yeah, well, at the minute, the NIFIS, we're sort of waiting on the NIFIS change. It's like this, bringing this in is dependent on the legislation and the NIFIS changes. Just we heard the other day that basically the NIFIS changes are ready. They'll be rolling them out to the tag suppliers, and they'll get a period of maybe 6 to 8 weeks to ensure their systems are compatible. So the latest date we have now is the start of August for rolling this out, so it should be ready in August for it.
Okay. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I really appreciate that. Okay, so members, following on from what we've heard today, and bearing in mind that the SL1 stage is the last opportunity for the committee to influence the policy approach, are members content that we have sufficient information to make a formal decision on the draft SR?
Yep.
Okay, thank you, members. So, I'm going to put the question on the SR, members, that the Committee for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs has considered Session SL1, the Cattle Identification Number 2 Amendment Regulations, Northern Ireland 2026, and has no objection to the rule subject to the ESR report. Members, are you agreed? Thank you, members. Okay. Agenda item 7, members, is SL1, the Draft Air Quality Amendment Regulations, Northern Ireland 2026. I'm going to refer you to your pack and the SL1 Clerk's Scrutiny Memo dated the 22nd of May, which is page 146. The SL1 letter dated 24th of April at page 150. And the draft SR and the explanatory memorandum starting at page 156. Members, the Department submitted the above SL1 and draft SR under the negative resolution procedure to the Committee on the 16th of April to advise of its intention to amend annual average limits, targets and objectives contained within the existing legislation, the Air Quality Standards Regulations Northern Ireland 2010 and the Air Quality Regulations Northern Ireland 2003. To ensure applicable annual mean limits, targets and objectives are more reflective of the concentrations of these pollutants being monitored in Northern Ireland at present. At our meeting on the 30th of April, the committee agreed to receive an oral briefing from DAERA officials today. We also agreed to issue a call for views using the Citizen Space platform, which we received no responses to. I now welcome the following officials to brief the committee and answer any questions. We have Ms Amy Holmes, Head of Air and Environmental Quality Branch, and Mr Martin Blaney, the Environmental Policy Advisor. Thank you very much for your attendance, and please feel free to brief the committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. So these regulations look at particulate matter, which are particles that float about in the ambient air. There's two different sizes of them, PM10, which is larger, and PM2.5, which is capable of going through the lungs and into the bloodstream. And we know from a recent 2023 British Heart Foundation report looking at air pollution and mortality on the island of Ireland, 936 deaths in Northern Ireland per year attributable to fine particulate matter. And the International Agency for Research on Cancer has also classed ambient air pollution, which includes particulate matter, as a Group 1 human carcinogen. So, you know, we're very keen looking at this very serious health impacts to see what more we can do in Northern Ireland to improve human health. So in 2021, the World Health Organization released a report and it included air quality guidelines. The guideline is an ultimate level, a figure of different pollutants that they would like to see across the globe. And in getting to that ultimate guideline level, there are 4 interim targets. And what DAERA is proposing is bringing our legislation more up to date and in line with interim target number 4. So the World Health Organization guidelines and interim levels are not legally binding, and there's no suggested date for implementation, but what they're trying to do is seek a progressive improvement in air pollution. So what these regulations are doing is they have 2 separate operational dates because they amend 2 separate pieces of regulation, the Air Quality Northern Ireland Regulations 2003 and the Air Quality Standards Regulations 2010, and due to the legal way those 2 regimes operate, there are slightly different operational dates, which allows us to then have a compliance date for all of the targets, limits and objectives of the 1st of January 2028. So the 2003 regulations identify the relevant authorities for air quality in Northern Ireland and set out the objectives which are to be achieved. The regulations themselves are technically and legally a bit complex, but what they essentially do is update the names of Northern Ireland government departments. They remove obsolete references. So, for example, if there was a previous compliant date of, say, 2004, which has now been passed some time ago, we have updated that. We have also changed the definition of relevant period so that instead of having to make the new limit objective by a certain date, there is now an obligation for ongoing compliance. So it's essentially a rolling compliance that requires compliance by a certain date and every year thereafter. And that would ensure that there is no subsequent reduction in environmental or human health protection. The schedule reduces the annual average objective for PM10 from 40 to 20 micrograms per metre, and it also revokes a previous set of amendment air quality regs, which is essentially a tidying up exercise to keep the statute book neat and tidy and as easily understood for the public as possible. So the amendments to the 2010 regs is to reduce the annual average limit value for PM10 from 40 to 20 and from PM2.5 from 25 to 10. We're also reducing the target value. Now, the target value is more of an aspirational level, which is more sort of strict, a lower value than the other two. So we have updated that figure in line with the other proposed amendments. And this also amalgamates into one place in the form of a new schedule information that was previously contained in the EU directives, so information on threshold levels. Again, a tidying up exercise to make it easier for public and district councils to understand. In developing these regulations, we have engaged with district council environmental health officers on an operational level to ensure that they are operable. And district councils were overall supportive of this. This is the environmental health officers overall supportive of this, and we have taken on board and considered their suggestions where possible. And we've also sought some independent specialist advice on the technical aspects of this legislation and the way the amendments will operate. You'll also be well aware of the transboundary nature of air quality. So in proposing these regulations, we have engaged closely with colleagues in GB and the Republic of Ireland, looked at their legislation, and what we're doing is bringing our legislation more in sync with theirs to reduce transboundary discrepancies of concentrations of air pollution. So the next steps, subject to your consideration or comments and perhaps ultimate approval, we would then launch to a 8 to 12 week public consultation, depending on the timescale available and needing to lay these by the end of the calendar year to ensure the compliance date of early 2028. And then the normal process of analysing responses, public synopsis, ministerial approval, and then laying the regs. So that's the big picture aspect of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I'm sure the members will have a few questions for you. Just in terms of the air pollutants, what's been tested for, so some of it will be naturally occurring, and in the paper it talks about Saharan sands and things like that. Some of it will be industry produced or induced, I would imagine. Are there any particular concerns in Northern Ireland? And I know you've talked about the transboundary, so air and water knows no borders anyway. So are there any particular concerns in terms of any of the industrial processes in Northern Ireland that either would or could contribute?
Not so much in terms of industrial processes. We know that we would have a different sort of home heating makeup in Northern Ireland, perhaps more reliant on solid fuels as opposed to gas, as is the case in GB. And you may be aware of the Peace Plus work, the cross-border work that's being done. One aspect of that is looking in particular at PM and solid fuel burnings and what's happening in the north versus what's happening in the south to try and improve that and educate us. In terms of source apportionment, Martin, do you know from the inventories what the sort of PM 2.5 sources would be?
PM 2.5, we still have a high level from residential burning. I think there's across the UK that they're taking steps to try and tackle that now, and also there's a new EU directive coming into place for Europe for tighter limits as well. So I think those aspects will help with the transboundary effect that could come into Northern Ireland as well.
There has been a recent UK-wide consultation launched by DEFRA, and it looked at new emission limits for stoves, labelling and...
Labelling of fuels and labelling of stoves and new stove smoke emission values in smoke control areas for Northern Ireland.
So DEFRA is currently going through the responses on that, and we'll work very closely with DEFRA to see what the options are to be done either on a UK-wide basis or policies that Northern Ireland may wish to take forward.
Okay. I imagine that the testing facilities are strategically placed and that it's monitored on a regular basis. But one of the first presentations that I went to in the Balmoral show was in and around farmer health, and it was I think it was Asthma UK did a phenomenal presentation on the risks, particularly posed to farmers who are working in close proximity to dust and pesticides. Is that does this? I imagine that this regulation is more out in the wider public spaces, but does this have any crossover at all in terms of farm activities? Rural activities?
Only insofar as this governs the concentration in ambient air, so the air all around us. This will not target any specific industry or group or geographical region, but certainly improved air quality on farms would be very helpful for human health. I'm also aware of secondary particulate matter that can come from ammonia, and that would show up, for example, in some of the monitoring we do, but the management of ammonia on farms would be governed by different regimes, all of which could, as they progress and they develop, have an impact, a knock-on impact on the overall concentrations that we're seeing in ambient air.
Okay, thank you so much. Declan.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the ammonia, what was the secondary, you mentioned about the secondary...
secondary particulate matter. So what can happen is you can have chemicals in the atmosphere in the presence of other chemicals that react and form new compounds. So increased in ammonia emissions can increase secondary particulate matter. Another example of pollutants changing is that we can have VOCs, volatile organic compounds, in the presence of nitrogen dioxide, and sunlight can then form tropospheric ozone, which you think of the ozone layer as great for human health and protecting us from rays, but at ground level, ozone can actually be quite damaging to human health. So we're acutely aware that we're doing all of this, that reducing one level of pollutant can have knock-on effects on other pollutants. And, for example, ozone, we can't control the weather, lovely as it is, but, days like this, we might be seeing increased levels of ozone in certain places. And I know the south of England does have some alerts or slightly elevated levels at the moment, just due to the good weather at the moment.
And is there particular sectors that you need to particularly work with, around these emissions? Or?
Certainly, we do have the emissions inventory, which is released every year, and that's sort of model data, and it can give an indication for Northern Ireland of the percentage source of a certain pollutant from a particularly industry. And I'm sorry, I don't have that in front of me today, Declan, but in terms of particulate matter in Northern Ireland, it would be more looking at residential solid fuel burning and the options for that. So as I said, we've got the UK-wide consultation that we're looking at. We're also working with colleagues in the Republic of Ireland on Peace Plus, and what they're doing is a sort of a twin-towned approach to look at levels at one town in the north and something similar in the south, to try and get more data that's more specific to the island of Ireland, to see what may work or may not work for Northern Ireland, with a view to looking at those options more specifically.
And I should also say, obviously, it's essential to the clean air and the impact on health is something we definitely support, but I think it's also important too that looking at, I suppose, mitigations, because we're doing this in the context of fuel crisis, where people are finding hard pressed as well, and also, small businesses are hard pressed as well. So it's important to do mitigations. We need to improve air quality, but we also need to support sectors as well for effectively achieve we talk about the just transition is important.
Yeah, there
Can I
is.
just say there, that's one of the reasons why we went for the interim target 4 is because it's a stepping stone approach to stricter levels in the future. It means that we're not hitting certain industries hard, and we've looked at monitoring and model data to show that these can be achieved, and it's just maintaining that and looking at policies going forward then and how you can in the future take it down to stricter levels then, I suppose.
That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Before I bring John in, I think that's a really useful angle you've opened up there. Are there any anticipated impacts, short-term impacts of this regulation, given that Declan's painted a really good picture of where we are in terms of the use of oil, our dependence on that, but also solid fuel burners, because as we know, the oil tap could get turned off very quickly. And then people will be using, and then obviously a lot of that is retrospective. So I imagine that this will apply to new appliances, but people will have appliances. So I mean, has there been an anticipated impact in the short term with the new figures?
What this won't do is target a specific industry or anything like that. It's, as I said, it's in the ambient air. And what we have done in looking at this is we've gone right back to our monitoring sites across Northern Ireland and looked at the number of sites that would currently be making this. So, for example, in 2024, which is the most recent full year of ratified data that we have, the new annual average limit of 10, there were 10 sites in total, and all 10 had were already making the proposal that we are, making the limit that we are proposing. And while some may say, why aren't you going further? It's important to recognise that an element of the particulate matter is natural and we can't control it. Also aware that we're very keen to expand the monitoring network. You know, there are some council areas in Northern Ireland where there are populations and no monitoring is done, so we don't know what the levels there are. So we see this very much as an interim step to see what is happening. Do we continue to make these where there's maybe a couple of sites that have been very close to the level? We want to see that they can sustain that, and then we can look at in either reducing these levels further, or where we see perhaps there's a new site and there are problems with particulate matter. That's when the legislation and the local air quality management regime would kick in, and we would work with district councils through the local air quality management grant. They would designate an air quality management area, and through that they would work with, for example, other government departments to put in place an action plan with a view to bringing down the pollutant of concern in that area over the medium term.
And in terms of just final one for me before I bring John again, is there any specific powers that come with this, from the department that enable the department to demand that either industry or council take action?
We'd need to check the exact detail of the legislation, but what we do have is the department has the power to monitor.
Yep.
The power to take action sits with the district council. Mm-hmm. I would need to check if the department has a power to act in default if a district council ever didn't. We have never had that situation. We work very closely with all 11 district councils on the monitoring, and particularly where they have action plans. We would regularly meet with the likes of transport if it's an air quality management area designated for nitrogen dioxide, which is primarily a transport pollutant. We would work very closely with them with a view to getting them revoked, which is a very positive thing if they no longer need the special designation of concern. Thank you.
John.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to both of you. This question's a direct follow-on from what Declan was asking and some of what the Chair referred to there as well. The paper makes clear, and it's not disputable, that responsibility for this sits with DAERA. It's not cross-cutting in terms of Northern Ireland Government Executive regime, but it's very much interdepartmental and interagency and intersectoral when it comes to the contributions, contributory factors in air pollution quality. So is there going to be any stepping up of action plans that were referred to, or any conscious effort made to work across the sectors, energy, industry and all of the others, councils were mentioned there for example, to ensure that any new and more ambitious targets can be met?
So based on the targets that we're proposing, we're confident that won't create any issues. Perhaps if we get to a stage where we're looking at bringing forth tighter targets or objectives, what we do have, there is the energy strategy which DFE leads in on, and a lot of the sort of industry just transition factors on that, and we meet with them regularly. There's also the forthcoming clean air strategy. And it once it's out to consultation and is finalised, it can pick up a lot of this cross-departmental work. We certainly work very closely with the other departments on a lot of policy areas, and with DEFRA and the Republic of Ireland. And we're currently looking at the next 6 years of the local air quality management grants and the business case to fund all of that work that I alluded to with the councils and the action plans. That's gone to DOF now for approval. So we are looking at the medium and the long term of what this looks like in terms of options, the balance that needs to be struck, giving people a choice, and also giving people and councils the support to do the actions that need to happen. It's not just legislation, there's money to come as well.
Existing strategies and actions will pick up on the new framework set by the department.
Yes.
I understand that. Then from that, can I ask, are you aware of any effort being made to increase the number of air quality monitoring sites?
Absolutely, that falls within our team's remit. Over the last 5-6 years, I'd need to check, we've got 5 new PM 2.5 monitoring stations. One of them was in Enniskillen, so Fermanagh and Omagh, I think that was their first automated monitoring station. And apologies, colleagues that deal with that aren't with me today, but we do have an annual air pollution report that outlines that. Martin, is it 22 air quality monitoring stations?
Yeah, we have 22 air quality monitoring stations across Northern Ireland. And just from 2019, we had 3 PM 2.5 monitors, and that's now up to 10. That's probably 11 now, actually, in 2026.
And when, 2003?
2019.
2019, sorry, but misheard.
Well, that's from 2019 to 2024. We've gone from 3 to 10 sites. And what our team did last year was release a contract for an independent review of the air quality monitoring network in Northern Ireland. And we looked not just at legislative compliance, but where should we be monitoring to improve human health? Where are the gaps? Looking at population density, where the population has changed, emerging pollutants of concern, and also are there things that were issues in the 70s that are no longer pollutants of concern now, and should we change? So we have the findings from that report. We have gone through as a team, sought additional independent clarification on some of the recommendations, and we have prioritised those recommendations, and we are in the process of going out to the councils collectively to let them know what our thinking is and to seek their views. And also we've started to put bilateral meetings with each council in the diary to discuss recommendations about what this report has come out, and what is urgent that we need to action now, what's a medium term and what's a long term, looking both at legislative compliance and wouldn't it be great if we could, there's different levels of aspiration, I suppose, but no, that's a project that we have started, we've kicked off, we've got the results, we're getting the funding through the local air quality management grant to implement.
So, Chair, if I could ask then, the review of the air quality monitoring network, is that complete and then the actions are flowing from that now, or is that review still ongoing?
That will be an ongoing review. We have had the initial reports and sought further information. We're now at the stage of engaging with councils, those actions will be taken through as sort of business as usual work through our ongoing engagement with the councils and the local air quality management regimes. So that's our bread and butter, what we do every day.
Thank you, that was very useful.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. And Michelle?
Well, thank you, Sharon, and thank you for your presentation. I'm just curious about divergence with the rest of the United Kingdom. I mean, obviously, I'll see that the targets for England are the 31st December 2040, and Wales 31st of December 2035. So why is our date then 2028?
To improve human health quicker and faster, and we're confident based on the compliance in previous years that we are already making it, or even if we expanded monitoring, we would have a good chance of making that. We work closely with the other DAs, and we've sort of engaged with them on this, and I know our Minister is very keen to improve human health in Northern Ireland through having a compliance date earlier than the others, and as I said, we're confident we can make that, and if through increased monitoring we spot any problems, we can then deal with that on a phased basis.
And why 2028?
Because we need to give 1 full year for the district councils to achieve the objective. So,
yes, but why 2028 and not 2030?
So that from looking at the data, we believe that this can be achieved now. So we feel that setting a target, giving them 1 year, will give the notice essentially that this is coming in and it can be achieved.
Sometimes we can set ourselves realistic targets, sometimes we can set ourselves unrealistic targets. But whenever you set yourself a very clear target such as this, then you're opening yourself up then to legal challenge as well if you fail to meet your target.
Mm-hmm.
So, have you ensured that you've sort of covered yourselves with regards to the date that you have set?
In the past, there have been instances where an annual average target limit or objective, as previously set out in the UK-wide strategy, has not been met, and there has been no litigation. We are confident, based on the analysis that we've undertaken for these particular pollutants, that at the sites where we monitor, that there wouldn't be a breach or an exceedance. And we're also confident that even if there were to be, we have the necessary backup legislative regime actions and funding systems in place to ensure that that's alleviated or rectified as soon as possible through work with the district councils.
Okay, and can you be clear, just the role of district councils in relation to whenever you talk about it being on an operational level?
So the legislation requires DAERA and the district council to undertake some monitoring where it is found that a target limit or objective is exceeded or is likely to be exceeded. The district council are required to declare an air quality management area, and as part of that process they need to prepare an action plan, and they work with the relevant authorities designated in the legislation, so the likes of ourselves and DFI if it's a transport issue, to think up actions that can be taken to improve the air quality within that specific area. And we have the local air quality management grant that DAERA funds the district council every year, and for example we fund things like 50% of staff costs. If it's new monitoring, 100% we can fund for awareness campaigns, which a number of the councils have done, and other actions that the councils want to put forward to help with that. And if you'd like sort of further information on those sorts of actions, we're very happy to speak to colleagues who deal with this and come back to committee if you have specific questions on the operation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? Gareth?
Yeah, I suppose just in terms of the issue of air quality, I'm just on the map, and I know Armagh, going back a number of years, there was an issue in Armagh in terms of air quality, particularly around the Mall, and and it was largely linked to traffic movements and the sort of the slowness of that. And I'm on the map at the minute, and everywhere's looking really good. It's looking quite low, and the forecast is low. And I'm just wondering, in terms of the data gathered from that, does that influence your trajectory on this? If because it looks good at this minute in time. So what makes it bad, I suppose? Because looking out, I would have assumed a real hot day and a lot of people out and about, traffic moving quite slow, it's bound to generate more pollutants. But looking at this map today, everywhere's green, and enjoy your usual activities is what the advice from this DAERA sponsored website is. So I'm just curious.
DAERA air quality website with the sites on it, yes. So what those numbers 1 to 10, that's called a DAQI, a daily air quality index. So that's a 24-hour average. Yeah. So what you can see is you can have a short 15-minute spike, And the DACI wouldn't pick that up because it's averaged over a
Wouldn't pick that
It
up?
wouldn't pick that up because
What's the point of it if it won't pick it?
it's the DACIs and the screen I think you're looking at the moment is more of long-term protection. If you can click in on the website to the data, and there's two types of graphs. You can see a line graph, so you can then see the trajectory of a particular pollutant over the last number of hours, and we would use that quite closely in our team to know if we need to issue an air quality alert.
And then I wonder in terms of, I know in Armagh, you know, the link roads is a big thing in terms of removing those bottlenecks in and around the city and diverting it onto the bypasses essentially, and that's really on the go slow. I don't think it could go any slower in terms of a project, but how do you feed your data into a DFI to go, well look, here's, you know, rather than hammering other businesses or hammering other homeowners, how are you looking strategically at this in terms of going, well look, if we can get the traffic away from our city centres, if we can get it moving freer, your car is on the road for a lesser period of time, generating a lesser amount of pollutants. So what's your take on that? How are you influencing other departments in terms of how they should be conducting their projects or moving them on quicker with, you've said, ultimately human health is the basis of this?
That data is publicly available, and there is a data repository behind that website that goes back, I believe, to the 1990s. Colleagues in DFI are aware of it. We also draft every year the Air Pollution in Northern Ireland report that Martin leads on, and again, all of that is publicly available. From the, I suppose, planning perspective, where DFI would have a role, you know, they're aware not only of this website but our team's noise website, so again they can use all of that data, of which huge repository for the different noise sources in Northern Ireland, to help them inform their decisions and their I suppose their policies.
And in terms just, you know, the wood burning stoves consultation there finished in March. What was the overall takeaways from that? Have you assessed the responses from that?
That was a DEFRA run consultation, so DEFRA is assessing those at the moment. We've had a number of meetings with DEFRA by way of updates, and I think there was quite a number of responses, and they're still working through the responses, so no, we don't have a readout on that at present.
I suppose one of the things in closing, I mean, I have a wood burning stove myself. It's linked up to my heating. It's ultra efficient. I can heat my house in the winter on old pallets or any off-cut of timber that I can find, and I don't throw any of it out. It all gets through in the fire, and when it's lit, my oil is off. So I can literally be almost off the grid bar, we would have electric to run the pump. So I just find that really efficient, and I'm not using oil essentially, so it's really cheap. And then the house is insulated so the heat stays in, rather than being escaping and losing, you know, all that heat. But are you coming for my wood burning stove is what I'm asking, because I know people are I'm really protective of mine because it works so well and it saves me money. I'm really passionate about it, and I put a lot of work into with my plumber and the design of it to make it work, and it does work, and it's really cheap, and it's paid for itself 5 times since I've owned it. So in terms of that, and I know other people in the country are the same, so they're really passionate about it because I've spoken to them, and they are, but they're concerned when they hear about this and they feel, oh, there's going to be some restriction to force me into some scheme that's going to cost a fortune, whereas mine and other people's that I speak to are really efficient, and they work and they deal with a lot of waste timber efficiently. And I get the point about particulate matter, but you know, versus the overall impacts, I think it's negligible, versus when you consider Northern Ireland's sort of issue that's well documented in terms of alcohol and public health. There's so many other aspects of society that cost this province an immense amount of money, and the health minister has been on his feet very recently on the issue of alcohol and its impacts. 900 million per year, affecting all our A&E admissions. I think it's like 6 out of 10 admissions at the weekends are alcohol related. So I get the piece, we have to balance all these aspects, but in terms of weighting them, in terms of public health, I'll be more dubious about that. Not just, you know, I'm not pushing it away, but what I'm saying is it representative of where the biggest pressures are in terms of public health?
In answer to your question, are these regulations likely to have a direct impact or bring forth more regulations in relation to stoves in particular? No, because we are confident, you know, on the basis of the data that we're meeting these already. I can't answer what the outputs from the UK-wide consultation on stoves limits will be. I know some of what is proposed in that may be for DFE or for Department of Health to take forward, and some of it may be, for example, voluntary labelling scheme. We also think with this there's a big piece in and around education and understanding on burning, and it's not just the outdoor air quality, there's also the indoor air quality piece, which can be more of an issue with any sort of combustion sources. For example, if you're opening the front of your fire as well.
That can also be an issue in, you know, living in towns, central towns, and traffic moving quite close.
Absolutely, and that's where we also have a different legislative regime, the smoke control regime. So where a district council has designated a smoke control area, usually within an urban area, there are slightly different rules that apply as regards what appliances you're allowed to have in your home, and depending on the type of appliance that you have, what you can and can't burn in terms of bituminous coal, manufactured solid fuels or wood products. So we have that going in tandem as well.
I suppose just you can understand the public scepticism when they look across the world and they see huge oil refineries on fire, bilging black smoke right across the globe, you know, so it all has to be quite based in reality at the same time. For what
you say on the consultation, it is only looking at new stoves, so it wouldn't be affecting anyone with existing stoves.
Yeah. Right.
Thank you. Okay, members, no further questions? Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you both.
Okay, members, following on from what we've heard today, and bearing in mind that the SL1 stage is the last opportunity for the committee to influence the policy approach, are members content that we have sufficient information to make a formal decision on the draft SR? Yep. Okay, I'm now going to put the question that the Committee for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs has considered SL1, the Draft Air Quality Amendment Regulations, Northern Ireland 2026, and has no objection to the rule subject to the ESR report. Are you agreed? Thank you, members. Okay, members, I'm going to ask for your indulgence and take a 5-minute comfort break and then return. So if you could be back in the room for about 11:25, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
Committee Room 21. Sound. 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 Committee Room 21. Sound.
Okay, members, that's open in public session. Again, now we're going to look at agenda item 8, which is the areas of natural constraint payments bill research raised papers. Members are aware the committee stage started on the 24th of March and the committee stage has been extended to the 22nd of January. I now wish to highlight that as things are moving to a phase of considering a number of bills in parallel going forward, as bill-related papers will be issued in a separate bill pack for each bill, which we will receive via the ECP and will be updated each week. So members, are you content to note that? Thank you. I now refer you to the pack at page 168 to the raised paper based on the ANC payments bill. I now welcome Mark Allen from RAISE to brief the committee and answer any questions we might have, and this starts the oral evidence session process for our committee stage. So thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members. And I suppose just as a start, this is the first time actually in my 16 years I've done one of these that has got to this stage, so you'll forgive my formality because it's difficult, I suppose, with a member of the committee who's also the proposer. I'm going to refer to proposer throughout, so it's not that I don't know the proposer, we're just simply trying to apply the way we would normally approach it. I should also say that at the outset that there is a companion research paper, and our initial intention had been that my colleague Nathan Mulholland would actually have joined me today because his paper actually looks at greater detail the potential costs of the bill. Unfortunately, Nathan is actually in Paris at an OECD event, but before you maybe assume there's much glamour there, I'm told it's 40-degree heat, and he has no air conditioning in his hotel, so I think he would quite happily be here, but I think his plan is to join yourselves at a further date to go into greater detail there. So without further ado, I'll make a bit of progress here. I suppose the areas of natural constraint payments bill, as was introduced, is really, its specific aim is to reintroduce targeted financial support for farmers operating in disadvantaged areas, and that's particularly upland and marginal land in Northern Ireland. The bill is made up of 4 clauses. I suppose essentially it requires DAERA to bring forward regulations within 12 months of assent to enable the paying of ANC payments to entitled persons. And those payments, the bill specifies, must be at least equal to the 2018 ANC scheme payment levels, and they must increase annually in line with the prices index. It's important to say, I suppose, at this point too, that this is an enabling piece of legislation and that establishes the requirement for payments but leaves much of the detail to future regulations. Just in terms of a bit of context for the bill and the environment it is seeking to operate within, I suppose LFA or ANC is a significant structural issue in Northern Ireland's agriculture sector. Around 69% of our agricultural land is classified as disadvantaged or more specifically less favoured. And again, I know I'm talking to the people who know this, but just for the record, LFA, less favoured area land, is made up of disadvantaged area and severely disadvantaged area. In terms of specifically SDA, severely disadvantaged, because that is the area that the previous bill, or previous regulations and previous scheme in 2018 focused on. If we look at what activity actually goes on in SDA in Northern Ireland, that accounts for 38% of our farms, 35% of our agricultural workforce, and we should recognise the fact that those farms face natural constraints such as poor soils, steep terrain, high rainfall, which effectively means that those farms have higher production costs and are very often too fewer opportunities to diversify. We also have to say that those SDA farms are really central to our beef and sheep production in Northern Ireland. It's predominant in areas of SDA and accounts for 46% of total NI beef production and 56% of total sheep production, so not insignificant. Also has to be said that our beef and sheep sectors remain heavily reliant on public funding support. There is no disaggregated data for SDA, but farm business income data for LFA, which is SDA plus DA, and I realise there's a lot of acronyms here, but it basically highlights the fact that farm business incomes, if you even took the most recent data for 22-23, if you took away the direct support that beef and sheep farms and LFA have, Those farms showed a farm business income of minus £10,629, so it highlights again how reliant they are on direct support. Also has to be said that when we look at the actual activity that goes on in SDA farms and SDA land, DERA's annual statistical review of Northern Ireland agriculture, and I looked at the period really covering 2018 to 2024, and this is actually on page 204 in your pack. If you want to look at it, you can see that whilst dairy cow numbers in SDA have remained steady, there has been a reduction in beef cow and breeding ewe numbers over that period, really since the last scheme effectively came to an end. Turning then just to a wee bit of background specifically on support. Previously, farmers in LFA and Northern Ireland have received support under various EU schemes. The most recent schemes were run under the Common Agricultural Policy, Pillar 2, as part of the Northern Ireland Rural Development Programme. And indeed, in the first scheme that really came through that route was the Less Favoured Areas Compensatory Allowance, or LFACA, as it's more commonly known. And that supported farms on land within DA and SDA. But a change in EU law in 2013 effectively meant that they introduced a new acronym, Areas of Natural Constraint, and that effectively saw DARD faced with having to make a change to where it could provide support. And the decision was made at that point that new ANC scheme would focus exclusively on SDA land. I have included at the back of your pack, or in the paper, pages 243 to 249, gives you an overview of the scale and location of SDA designated land within each county in Northern Ireland. That's based on the 2016 data, okay? But it's useful to give you a perspective as to where we're talking about. It's also important, I think, to say at this point that both LFACA and ANC support were funded by a combination of national and EU money. The 2016 ANC scheme, for example, which had around 10,000 applicants, claiming for approximately 350,000 hectares, that had a budget of 20 million, and that was composed of 60% EU funding and 40% national funding. The last ANC scheme ended in 2018, and there has been no direct replacement introduced in the subsequent years. Indeed, DERA ministers since 2018 have actually opposed reinstating ANC payments, citing limited evidence of a decline in farming activity and concerns around value for money. It's also worth noting that the last two schemes that operated in 2016 and 2018 both went ahead on ministerial direction due to value for money concerns, and that's just the Audit Office has the information in the links. Since 2018, there have been effectively two key policy developments, I suppose, that are relevant here as well. The UK obviously completing its leaving of the EU, and the UK Agriculture Act, which was came into force in 2020, really in response to the UK requiring a means to manage agricultural support post that leaving of the EU. And I suppose we have to highlight the fact that this bill is coming forward under provisions under Part 1 of Schedule 6 of that Agriculture Act 2020. The other significant development since 2018 has been DERA's efforts to develop their new Sustainable Agriculture Programme. To date, I suppose a lot of those programmes and schemes are in place. I have set those out in Table 3 that is in your actual paper, starting there on page 186 in the pack. And I suppose what we can see is there are a wide range of supports. You're well aware of them, you've heard about them, you've had regulations before you over this mandate. I suppose the significant thing is there is no dedicated ANC or SDA support. And it should also be stated that none of those supports that I've set out in Table 3 are inflation linked. They're all effectively a flat payment. That's one of the, I suppose, distinctions here. And I suppose at the time of writing, DERA has made a commitment to develop a specific support for the sheep sector, but as I sit here today, we still don't have any detail as to what that will entail. Table 4 then, just on pages 193 to 200 of your pack, sets out the situation regarding ANC payments and support in neighbouring jurisdictions in GB and Ireland. The headline figures basically are that it's only really Ireland and Scotland that continue to have this support. In Ireland, that figure amounts to €250 million annually. But it's important again to remember that'll be co-financed. It's not all national money. Scotland is operating in its broadly comparable, less favoured areas support scheme, ELFAS, which is an annual budget of about 65.5 million. And I've set out in that table some of the criteria that they apply. I'm not going to have time to go into that now. The important thing to say is neither England or Wales have this support at present, in line with ourselves in Northern Ireland. Turning then just to the public consultation that was done for the bill, there were 431 completed responses submitted, and those were broken down as follows. There were 78 individual submissions, there was a petition signed by 353 individuals, and there was one submission which was emailed from a farming group. The bill, on the basis of what is set out in that, has received strong public support, with 88.6% of respondents fully supporting the proposals. Respondents highlighted a range of issues, including financial pressures on upland farms, concerns around mental health, and the risks of land abandonment and environmental decline. When you look at the consultation responses in the round, there's a clear perception that ANC payments were essential to sustain farming systems and rural communities on the land that we were referencing, which is SDA. Just then, I want to turn then to some of the things, potential issues or areas for consideration, and these really start at page 221 in your pack. And I want to look firstly at those public consultation results, or the exercise, and some of the maybe questions around that. I suppose what we can say is, I think whilst the results clearly show strong overall support for the bill, with around 88% of respondents fully supportive, there are some important limitations in the data. Firstly, a significant proportion of responses came from a petition signed by 353 individuals, which is roughly 82% of total responses. I suppose when I looked at what was available, the content of that petition is unclear, which does make it difficult to assess how strongly it supports the specific details of the bill. Secondly, it could be argued is limited transparency around other submissions, including the identity and representation of a contributing farming group. I mean, how many members are on that farming group? And was it an individual submission, or was it representative of the entire membership? Finally, I think there could be a bit more detail around how many respondents actually opposed the bill, and why. And why, most significantly, why some respondents believe that the costs of introducing the bill may actually outweigh the benefits. In summary, whilst the consultation indicates strong support, further clarification and deeper analysis, I think, would improve confidence in the findings. Turning secondly then to financial memorandum issues, and that's page 222 in your pack, or the explanatory financial memorandum issues. The memorandum states that the bill itself has no direct financial impact, as costs will arise later through the regulations required to implement the scheme. And I suppose this does raise an issue. Whilst the bill, and I think it could be argued, may not directly allocate funding, the regulations it mandates will clearly have financial consequences, and these are not yet fully detailed. There's also an assumption that any future scheme would apply an active farmer requirement similar to the 2018 scheme that's set out in the EFM, but that's not actually in the text of the bill itself. And that, I think, maybe could potentially create some uncertainty around eligibility. In addition, the EFM suggests that administrative costs would be minimal, but provides no clear evidence or supporting data for this claim. Now, I realise, again, it's quite hard to do, because that's actually in the gift of the department. Finally, there is also limited detail on the cost of enforcement and compliance, and on the likelihood of recovering costs from penalties or offences. So just some potential questions there. Will DAERA aim to complete a more extensive and detailed financial impacts component for when they effectively are required to bring forward a regulation if the bill receives royal assent and becomes an act? And the reference to anticipation of beneficiaries to a reintroduced ANC scheme would have to be active farmers, as set out in the EFM, is potentially significant, as it's not included within the bill. Is the bill proposer committed to including this requirement within the text of the bill? I've just put it as a question because it may bring clarity. The EFM also suggests that the cost of administering the proposed scheme would be minimal, but as I say, the evidential basis for that is unclear. Does the bill proposer have any such data, and are they prepared to publish or share it? Or maybe more significantly, Does DARA hold programme-specific administrative cost data for the last ANC support scheme in 2018, and what does this show? Building on that, I suppose it's also, I think, useful to ask around the evidential basis for assessing the risk of fully recovering costs. Again, I think that's probably a question for DARA. Does DARA hold programme-specific cost recovery for convictions data for the last ANC support scheme, and what does that show? Turning then to section 7.3, which is page 224 in the pack, around interpretations within the bill. And I suppose a key issue when we looked at it is could potentially be the lack of clarity around the legal and policy basis for future ANC payments. The bill, as I've previously set out, relies on powers in the Agriculture Act 2020, which in turn referenced earlier EU legislation, particularly the Rural Development Regulation, which is EU 1305/2013. However, the bill does not explicitly state whether key provisions of that EU framework, especially those that define eligible areas, payment limits and rules such as digressivity, will apply to any future scheme. This could potentially create uncertainty around whether DARA would be bound by these existing rules, or whether it would have greater flexibility in designing any future scheme. There's also a risk that changes to or removal of underlying EU legislation could affect the legal basis of the scheme going forward if this is not clearly addressed in the bill. In addition, the bill does not reference key provisions that define how areas of natural constraint are identified, which may limit clarity around eligibility of land. So I suppose a couple of questions here. If Article 31 of the EU Rural Development Regulation is foundational for the bill, would this therefore suggest that the payment rates set out within it in terms of minimum and maximum fit with the bill proposer's aspirations, and as such would be binding for DARA? Moving to another issue, how would a reliance on Article 31 of the EU Rural Development Regulation be impacted by the revocation, amendment or replacement of either the regulation as a whole or Article 31 specifically? Would provision need to be built into the bill to take account of any such changes? And could a failure to do so mean that the bill provisions for any associated regulations would have no basis in law, and as such DARA would not be bound to deliver an ANC scheme? Could the failure to include a reference to the role of Article 32 of the Rural Development Regulation within Clause 1 of the bill either limit or enable the ability of DARA to designate or redesignate areas of natural constraint moving forward? I suppose in summary what I'm saying in this area is could the interpretations within the bill as introduced be expanded upon or better defined in order to enable the bill's provisions to continue to be valid in the context of any potential changes to EU legislation, more specifically Articles 31 and 32 and Annexes 2 and 3 of Regulation EU 1305/2013. Turning then to Section 7.4, which I've titled there the definition of ANC land, which is page 226 within your pack. A key issue, I think I have to say, is that the bill doesn't clearly define what land qualifies as an area of natural constraint. Whilst it may be inferred that the intention is to follow the previous approach, namely limiting eligibility to severely disadvantaged areas, this is not explicitly stated in the bill. Under the last scheme in 2018, the ANC scheme, only SDA land was eligible, and this was based on detailed mapping and specific eligibility criteria, such as minimum land area and forage requirements. So that raises a number of questions. Is it the intention of the bill proposer that in line with the 2018 regulations, and as suggested in the EFM, that only land within SDA would be eligible for renewed ANC support? Is the bill proposer similarly committed to the land eligibility provisions relating to size of holding and qualifying forage area as set out in the 2018 regulations? Is there a need for the bill provisions, most likely Clause 1, to provide more detail on specific eligibility for the proposed ANC support scheme? Mm-hmm. Is there any additional need for the bill to specify how DARA would identify qualifying land? Is the 2016 mapping exercise still valid? Would there be a need for DARA, for example, to undertake a new mapping exercise? And finally, in this one, what impacts would the exclusion of DA land from a new ANC scheme support have on farms within those areas? Would this adversely disadvantage farmers with DA land? Moving then to section 7.5 around eligibility of claimants, page 228 in your pack. A key issue really is that the bill doesn't clearly define who would be eligible to receive ANC payments. Whilst the accompanying financial memorandum suggests that recipients would need to be active farmers, this requirement is not included in the text of the bill itself. Under the previous 2018 scheme, as I said, eligibility was clearly defined. Regulation 4 of the 2018 Areas of Natural Constraint Regulations Northern Ireland included a number of additional eligibility criteria which supplemented the active farmer criteria. And I suppose that leads to those questions. Is it the intention of the bill proposer to seek continued adherence to the 2018 claimant eligibility criteria? And if this is the case, is there a need for this to be explicitly stated within the bill? And I also ask, could a failure to specify claimant eligibility within the bill enable DARA to utilise more or less restrictive criteria than those utilised in the 2018 regulations? And that could either adversely impact the number of farmers who may be eligible. It could be a positive thing or it could be a bad thing. Turning then to page 229 in your pack and section 7.6 around the scale and value of payments. I have to say Nathan's paper will deal with this in more detail, but I'll give you an abridged version here. A key issue is the uncertainty around the overall cost of reintroducing the scheme. The only real benchmark we have is the 2018 scheme, which cost approximately £8.8 million. That £8.8 million cost was met through co-financing, which I referenced previously, with 27%, £2.37 million, being national funding, with the remaining 73%, £6.42 coming from the EU. DARA data also reveals that there were approximately 8,000 beneficiaries of ANC support in the final year of the scheme in 2018. If payments were reintroduced today or reinstated today and uprated for inflation, the total cost could rise to around £12 to £13 million per year, depending on the price index used. It also needs to be restated that unlike the EU and ANC scheme, there appears to be no potential for EU co-financing, so costs would potentially need to be fully met locally. Two important challenges from that. First, the bill requires payments to be linked to an annual price index, but it doesn't specify which index should be used. This could potentially create variability in terms of costs and could allow flexibility, but also uncertainty in how payments are calculated. Part of the challenge here is due to the fact that there are a number of price indices utilised and recognised by the ONS. Consumer price indices technical guidance, which I've cited in the paper, indeed enlists a number. I've set this out for you. There's the Consumer Prices Index, including owner-occupier housing costs, CPIH, the Consumer Prices Index, the Retail Prices Index, RPI, and the Household Costs Indices, HCI. As set out in section 2.2 of the paper, the proposed annual increase in ANC payments by at least a percentage increase in the price index for that year would make any new ANC scheme unique in terms of agricultural support at this time. If you want to look at the differential impacts for the different indexes I've referenced there, table 11 on page 231 sets out effectively data that we've used there with an adjustment uplift data under each of the various indices, which shows you how there could be variation on both an individual payment per hectare rate and an overall payment, or the overall value of the scheme. In light of this, I think it's unclear whether DARA can afford this level of spending within the existing Sustainable Agriculture Programme budget, especially given wider financial pressures. The Department of Finance's draft multi-annual budget confirms the specific ring-fenced commitment to the tune of $332.5 million for agriculture, agri-environment, fisheries and rural development up until the end of 2029, and that is a positive given the pressures that other departments are over. However, at the time of writing, we don't know the complete and specific breakdown of this allocation to each of the constituent support areas within the Sustainable Agriculture Programme. Additionally, and as highlighted previously, this issue is particularly pertinent in relation to specific support for the sheep sector, which is a highly significant sector within the previously designated ANC areas, but we don't know what the value of that programme would be, and we don't know what impact it would have on the overall budget. It should be noted that DARA, along with all the other executive departments, is facing considerable pressure. The 2025-26 executive budget included the following assessment in terms of the specific outcome for DARA, and I quote, "The agreed allocations provide significant challenges for the department to continue to take forward its existing schemes and programmes, and managing the issues and challenges set out above will be very difficult." So just a couple of questions on this. Would DARA be able to afford a reintroduced ANC scheme under the SAP? If DARA was compelled to run and fund a renewed ANC scheme, how would it specifically fund this? Would or could additional monies be found, or would this be funded by making reductions to other sustainable agriculture programme supports? When will DARA be in a position to detail the full financial support allocations under the Sustainable Agriculture Programme? We are told there will be a specific sheep support scheme forthcoming. When will the details, including specific funding support available and associated costs, be announced? And I suppose then one question for the proposer. Is it the bill proposer's intention that a reintroduced ANC payment would continue to be digressive in nature, in line with the 2018 regulations, and is required by Article 31 of Regulation EU 1305/2013? Is there a potential need for the bill to prescribe a specific prices index for the calculation of any potential ANC payment in order to bring surety for DARA and potential beneficiaries alike? Building on this issue, which specific price index should be utilised? And finally, in this section, is it sustainable for any reintroduced ANC scheme to be subject to annual increases in value whilst other agriculture support schemes' budgets remain static? Turning then to section 7.7, which is interaction of the bill with other support. That's page 234 in your pack. A key issue is that the bill provides no detail on whether farmers receiving ANC payments would also be eligible for other support under the Sustainable Agriculture Programme. This is important because farmers currently rely on a range of schemes, including the Farm Sustainability Payment and other sector-specific supports, including those for the beef sector. The absence of detail raises two key uncertainties. First, it is unclear what the bill proposer intends, whether ANC payments are meant to complement existing schemes or act as a partial replacement. And secondly, if DARA were required to implement the scheme, it's unclear whether the department might choose to restrict access to other payments for ANC beneficiaries, as has been done in other programmes, and there is precedent even within our recent time. The current Farming with Nature scheme regulations, Northern Ireland 2025, for example, showed that DARA could limit support. Within those regulations, Regulation 4B excluded farm businesses with an active environmental farming scheme agreement in place from actually benefiting from Farming with Nature transitional support between 2025 and 27. So I suppose the two questions here really is, number one, what is the bill proposer's aspiration or intention for ANC support beneficiaries in terms of accessing additional Sustainable Agriculture Programme supports? Would being an ANC support beneficiary result in restricted access to other supports? And secondly, what would DARA's aspiration or intention be if they had to introduce an ANC support scheme? Would they seek to limit access for ANC support beneficiaries to other support schemes? I'm going to take a quick drink at this point because it is very warm and I'm trying to make progress here, if you bear with me. Turning then just to section 7.8, which is page 225, and this really deals with the lack of detail on regulation content. A key issue of the bill is that it provides very limited detail on what the future regulations will actually contain. Whilst the bill requires DARA to introduce ANC payments, it only specifies a small number of elements, such as maintaining at least 2018 payment levels and linking payments to a price index. Beyond that, most of the scheme design is left undefined. This means the bill, as we said, is essentially an enabling framework, giving DARA broad discretion to decide who qualifies, what land is eligible, and how payments are structured. Whilst that flexibility may be beneficial, it also creates risks. DARA could potentially introduce restrictive eligibility criteria or limit access to schemes in ways not anticipated by the bill proposer. For example, a failure to specify that being an ANC beneficiary would not restrict access to other sources of support under the Sustainable Agriculture Programme could theoretically enable DARA to discourage or limit access to any ANC scheme it brought forward. There's also little clarity on whether the regulations would include conditions seen in previous schemes, such as environmental requirements or penalties. So, three key questions. Would there be merit in providing further detail within Clause 1 of the bill in terms of what would be a requirement for ANC eligibility, and to stipulate the inclusion of the same in the regulations DARA would bring forward? Could this also potentially include conditions around environmental improvement? And that was an issue that I know featured at second stage. Could such detail also include similar data to that set out in Table 12 of your paper, which is on page 236, as it relates to claimant and land eligibility and the active farmer references? What would the regulations DAERA would be prepared to bring forward contain in relation to areas such as offences and penalties? Is it the proposer's intent that these provisions would be the same as those found in the areas of natural constraint regulations Northern Ireland 2018? Section 7.9 then, which is page 238 in your pack, around Assembly approval. The bill doesn't explicitly identify the form of Assembly approval that the regulations DAERA would be required to bring forward upon the bill receiving assent would be subject to. It should, however, be noted that the bill is being brought forward on provisions under Part 1 of Schedule 6 of the Agriculture Act 2020, and Paragraph 2.3 of Part 1 of Schedule 6 of that Act makes it clear that regulations under this paragraph are subject to affirmative resolution procedure. So based on that information, I make the point or the question, would there be value in confirming and restating when the text of the bill that any new ANC payments regulations made under the auspices of the bill and then Act would indeed be subject to affirmative resolution procedure? And we've only 2 to go here, so I will try and get through these as quick as I can. Section 7.10, which deals with the need for additional regulations, page 238 in the pack. And this supposedly really relates to an issue which was raised by the Minister at stage 2 of the bill. And a key concern really there is whether the bill on its own would be sufficient to enable ANC payments to be made in practice. The DAERA Minister, as I said, indicated that additional regulations may be required to restore or replicate the powers needed before any ANC payment regulations could take effect. And from my reading of the issue here seems to relate to the fact that the power to make regulations or make payments under an AN scheme were originally provided by Articles 48 and 49 of EU Regulation 1307/2013, which set the rules for direct payments to farmers under support schemes within the Common Agricultural Policy. As part of the UK's withdrawal from the EU process, EU Regulation 1307/2013 was incorporated into UK domestic law by the Direct Payments to Farmers Legislation Continuity Act 2020, which applied across the UK. Articles 48 and 49 of Regulation 1307/2013 were, however, omitted from UK statute by the adoption of the rules for direct payments to farmers Amendment Regulations 2020, and those applied right across the UK. So the key question is, would DAERA definitely need to bring forward additional regulation to restore the powers omitted by the rules for direct payments as they relate to ANC payments? Would a failure to do so mean that any ANC payments requirements emerging from the bill couldn't happen? Should the requirement for additional specific regulations to be made to restore actually be proven, should that be added to the bill? If additional regulations were required to do so, how long would it take DAERA to develop these and bring them forward for Assembly approval? What would be the cost of developing additional regulations if they were required? And could any such regulation development process run in tandem with the specific development of ANC regulations, or would it need to proceed or come after such a process? Section 7.11 then on page 240 in your pack, and this really just looks at the open-ended nature of the bill in terms of review. The bill doesn't specify at this point whether ANC payments are intended to be temporary or ongoing. While it may be assumed that the intention is to establish a long-term commitment, this is not explicitly stated in the legislation. As a result, DAERA could technically meet the bill's requirements by introducing a single time-limited set of regulations. In addition, the bill contains no requirement for review of either the Act itself or the regulations made under it. This means there would be no formal mechanism to assess whether the scheme remains effective, affordable or aligned with wider agricultural policy over time. And I suppose just a couple of key questions. What is the bill proposer's stance on the proposed support scheme payments? Are they advocating an open-ended commitment to such a scheme? If the bill proposer intends an open-ended commitment, does this need to be incorporated into the wording of the bill? And if the requirement for review was added to the bill provisions, what would be an appropriate review period, and would this be an ongoing commitment? And my final point, you'll be no doubt pleased to hear, relates to regulatory impact assessment, page 240. There is, as you will know, no requirement for members to conduct a regulatory impact assessment as part of the members' bill process, and that means that the bill proposer has met the requirements as set out in the handbook for members' bills within this mandate. Paragraphs 25 and 26 within the EFM, and I do commend the member for that, and the proposer did include a rudimentary assessment of equality impacts and human rights issues, despite there not being a requirement. However, the question, I suppose, is there maybe merit in exploring whether the proposer gave any more detailed consideration to any potential equality or rural impacts during the course of the bill's development? I suppose part of the challenge here is the fact that potential impacts could possibly be easier to access through scrutiny of the specific details around how ANC support would be targeted in the resulting regulations. So just 4 questions here to finish this. Did the bill proposer conduct any more detailed equality or rural impacts assessment as part of the bill development, and if so, what conclusions were drawn? If no formal regulatory impact assessment components were completed to date, should or will any potential regulations resulting from the bill becoming an act be subject to detailed consideration by DAERA? Would any regulatory impact assessment completed by DAERA actively consider the impacts on farmers and farmland that did not meet potential ANC eligibility requirements? And will DAERA be in a position to complete any required regulatory impact assessment work prior to the introduction of the regulations within the required 12 months after the bill provisions commence? And just to conclude, I think it's clear from looking at the bill as introduced, it does seek to address what does appear to be a gap in agricultural support policy since 2018, and it does have strong backing from stakeholders. However, there are questions around affordability, policy design in detail, implementation and long-term sustainability, and interaction with other farm supports. Ultimately, I suppose while the bill sets a very clear direction, its effectiveness will depend heavily on the detail of the regulations that follow. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Do appreciate that, Mark. And obviously, for full disclosure for anybody that's watching, and Declan did declare an interest in this, that he is the private member that has been referred to in much of that. So, there's you wouldn't have been aware, Mark, and you did cover it in your brief. That there are other schemes, and the Minister is developing one called the Farming with Nature Scheme Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland, and the committee's already been curious in regard to that and did pose a question in regard to the possible effect on areas with natural constraint. I think you were perhaps alluding to, maybe not that specific, but those type of events. In terms of your analysis with either the Republic or Scotland in particular, because I note that in Wales and England it's a universal provision of support for farmers, yes, and there's no specifics. What have they done in the Republic and Scotland, given that Scotland's is to be reviewed in 2026, I believe?
It is. Yes.
Have there been any derogations, carve-outs, or what way do the multiplicity of schemes then impact in those areas for similar areas of natural constraint?
I suppose the Scottish example of the investment is significant, Chair. As I said, £65 million a year. I think there has been quite a bit of work done through the farmers' unions in GB. I make specific reference maybe more so to Scotland or to Wales and England in relation to the fact that marginal land and agriculture in the uplands faces considerable challenges. I suppose that work is almost being done in those jurisdictions to lobby for specific support. To date that hasn't happened, but I think the mood is kind of similar in Scotland from what I've read. It's kind of quite hard to get full detail as to what the impacts are, but the debate is definitely very live as to why, in many people's eyes, that needs to continue. I suppose the other thing to think about with the LFAS is it's not just upland, it's highlands and islands.
Yes. And
particularly in the Scottish example, the island economies, where it's not just that it's marginal lands, it's incredibly isolated. So I suppose as to whether the budgetary pressures may well have an impact, but there's probably maybe more willingness in Scotland to continue that type of a support model, given the reliance on crofters or others on its support. In terms of Ireland, I mean, the commitment is there. It's significant. It's really just the continuity of the ANC scheme.
But I suppose my point is, does the ANC scheme provision sit alongside every other? Does it exclude from any other payment or support?
Not that I can see. I mean, effectively, if you go back to our own schemes, you could be a beneficiary of multiple supports. And I suppose that it's partly to the architecture as well, because back for members who were here at that time, we had Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. So effectively the ANC scheme and its predecessor were under rural development supports under Pillar 2. So you could avail of support under Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 as a farmer. Now, there were some questions over a number of years around land eligibility and whether you could claim for multiple schemes for the same land parcel. But in broad terms, yes, you were not excluded from availing of a menu of support.
Okay, a couple of things that jumped out at me too in reading the report was the degressivity, if I'm saying that right. So obviously that was part of the scheme previously.
Was.
Now the high level figure is completely different. I mean, in Scotland it looks like 10,000 hectares before it kicks in, I think, and it was 200 hectares here. Now I get that there's a bit of topography and geography around that.
There can be issues there, and I mean the other thing I suppose to say on that is, and I suppose it relates to my specific reference to the EU regulation, which is the foundation here for the provision. Degressivity is built in; it has to happen. So I mean, it's that's why it poses a question in terms of for I suppose Declan. I'll refer to you by name as in terms of what that means for a programme. I mean, the 2018, as you say, was the figure we had there. Would that continue to be valid? Would they move that up? Would they move that down? What impact would a lower threshold or a higher threshold have upon the overall budget? Those are questions I think that probably the department will have to grapple with as and when it's required to make regulations.
I'm just going to remind members, by the way, it's Mark that we're with today, and my mind's going over to Declan, and we'll get a chance to quiz Declan in the future. The other one then that pops up to me is
today.
It's captured in the report as well, which is the stocking levels, and how that's managed and mitigated. And then there's an upper threshold, I would imagine, where it would, and that's one of the reasons why it exists, by the way. I get that there are constraints with the topography, the geography and the land, and then obviously the scheme has to have its own regulatory aspects to that too.
And I suppose, Chair, as I alluded to in the briefing, that's why I suppose, and like it could be fair, it could be unfair. I suppose the point I made was, could the bill be more explicit around the regulations that it wishes to follow? I mean, if it's broadly in line with the 2018 ones, those do include provisions. It's not just active farmer, it's how you farm, it's the level of stocking that you have to hold. And I also alluded to, as was referenced at the second stage, there were a number of members and indeed the Minister who made reference to actually looking effectively for additional criteria, for example in relation to environmental impact or environmental benefits. So those are questions almost for the regulation, but I think at this point, even though it's a bill, they are merit further consideration as to what they might actually mean, because that has a significant bearing upon eligibility and by result about what actually, if there's a greater or smaller number of people eligible upon the budget.
Okay, and a final one from me then. The paper highlights that 69% of the agricultural land is classified as less favoured.
Yes.
SDA farms around 38%. Have you come across any rationale as to explain why the Dairy Minister has not wished to include ANC payments?
I think I stated in the paper, and Minister Muir and indeed his predecessor, Minister Poots, and indeed a former minister on the committee as well, value for money and budgetary challenges are the major reasons that have been cited. As I said, the 2016 and 2018 schemes actually had to go ahead under ministerial direction. Minister Muir has been consistent that it's the financial pressure which alarms him. I think there is a wider question around to, I suppose, would sheep support and beef support effectively in unison if a farmer is able to avail of those? Do those replace what effectively would have been an ANC scheme? That's a question above my pay grade, I suppose, but I think that's part of this debate around what's the appropriate model of support. And I suppose tied to that too is the question, as I emphasised, if you were a recipient of ANC support, would it exclude you from either sheep support or beef support, or could DARE decide to do that?
The Sheep Task Force have been quite explicit from its inception in terms of the lack of a support scheme specifically for sheep.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. Declan, would you have any questions for Mark?
It's turning interest. I suppose I welcome this, and this is the benefit of committee. You know, this type of scrutiny that's thrown up all of these questions, which will help me, along with my researcher and policy people, address some of these, Mark, as we move forward the committee scrutiny stage and into the consideration stage. One of the schemes which I noted in your paper was, I know I'd always said that England hasn't got that, but I note in your paper that England does have a moorland grazing support scheme. What shape does that take, Mark?
It's off the top of my head, Declan, I can't remember, but I looked at this before. It's part of their overall package, but you can effectively get a payment per hectareage, I think, for it if you have a specific criteria that you've met for upland or moorland. I can come back to you on that with more detail, but yes, it is there. It's almost one of those. I can't even remember the term, but I'm trying to find it here on it. They have a term where yes, it's that one around. It's the environmental schemes that they have. I think it's actually part of as the sustainable farming incentive. You can almost put together a menu or a package of measures that you want to apply for under that, and that includes those specific ones where you can secure a payment if you have land which effectively qualifies. So you have the moderate livestock grazing in moorland, which is £20 per hectare for 3 years, and the low livestock grazing in moorland, which is 53, which is, particularly the £20 one is kind of coming back into sort of the territory where our previous ANC scheme was.
So for all, leaving aside terminology, for all intents and purposes, Scotland, the south of Ireland and England have some sort of a scheme to support farmers in marginal land, and the north doesn't.
At this point, yes. I mean, I think the English one, I suppose, it's more nuanced in the sense it's not a dedicated.
It's area based.
It's area based. It's area based, and you can have those measures within it. And I suppose that, as I did say, Wales and England, there is considerable debate around whether the actual existing supports for uplands and marginal land are sufficient.
All I can just say in broad terms, my objective was always to try to attempt to move our farmers on to some sort of a equal footing, a level playing field with farmers in other parts of Ireland and indeed parts of the UK as well, and that's not the case by not having that type of support.
No, and the most, as you say, directly comparable are Scotland and down south, which are really, I suppose, well, down south just as continued, and Scotland's is really the legacy scheme from ANC.
That's okay, thanks, Chair.
No problem. Thank you very much, Declan. Members, any questions for Mark? Tom, no? Daniel, happy enough? Yep.
We'll get into it.
Oh, comprehensive paper.
Yeah.
There's a lot of detail in there. Okay, members, then I'm going to John. Have you any questions for Mark? Are you content? There's a detailed paper, and I'm sure it will form a significant part of our deliberations. We reserve the right to haul you back here, Mark. I mean, invite you back.
I want to thank Mark for this. By the way, this is really detailed, and I actually have it printed out, so I'm going to be all fun marks and.
Thank you. Thanks for that.
Over the course of the next.
Again, we are, as I say, Nathan will, I know, is open and can talk more on some of the specific around finance. But thank you.
We really do appreciate it. And just I'm going to seek the committee's agreement that we're going to write to Declan. I know Declan is indicated today is printed out. We're going to write to Declan and request answers to the queries that have been raised and highlighted. Would like that by next week, Declan. I think that would be a challenge even for someone with a team of a lot of people. But are you content with that approach, members?
Thank you, Chair.
Yep, thank you.
As long as he speaks to the finance minister. No pressure, Declan. No pressure.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark. Okay.
Nathan is coming on the 18th of June before. So
there you go.
on the costing.
3 weeks, guys, for Nathan's piece. Okay. Okay, then members, still on the topic of the NCBL, also referred to packet page 250 to the draft stakeholder list for potential oral evidence sessions. Given that it's now likely that we will have 3 bills running in parallel by September, we may not have scope to hold oral evidence sessions with all on that list. So members content that the clerk prioritises from this list for oral evidence sessions, with the caveat that if there's a particular organisation that a member wishes to give oral evidence, that you alert the clerk as the committee stage progresses. Content with that, members?
Yeah.
Yes, Michelle?
Obviously, there is reference there to the likes of Mid-Tyrone Lamb Group, which obviously will be encapsulated within the ANC area. But I'm just conscious of the fact that there are also lowland farmers who may not be included in some of this. Perhaps we might want to look at some sort of balance, because in the event of no payment, specific payment being identified for ANC. Obviously, others will be impacted by it.
Yeah, we definitely do that. I suspect, and that's one of the things probably when we have the like of the
It's about getting a balance.
yeah, it's UFU would be really interrogate that, but I think you're right. That's a fair point, Michelle. Yep. Okay, members. So all organisations on the list will be emailed to encourage them to complete the committee's call for reviews. So members, as you know, the call for reviews on the NC bill will close on the 6th of July. The usual course of action is not to take oral evidence until after that closing date. However, it is not without precedent to start oral evidence earlier, especially in the last year of the mandate, to meet reporting deadlines. So members, are we agreed that we commence the oral evidence sessions on the 18th of June, as at present there is space in the forward work programme? Yep, thank you, members. Okay. Thank you, members. Agenda item 9 is the departmental written briefing consultation on the introduction of fixed fees for marine EIA services, screening and scoping up opinions. This title is slightly different from the paper in the table papers, but is now the new preferred title from the department. The paper remains the same. So I refer you to the written paper starting at page 18 of the table papers regarding proposals to charge fixed fees for EIA screening and scoping opinions provided under the Marine Works Regulations 2007 as amended. A copy of the consultation document starts at page 21 of table papers. Please note, members, that the document is embargoed until the 5th of June when it is intended that the consultation will launch, so don't intend to say too much. DAERA is the Marine Licensing Authority for Northern Ireland Shore Region. That is the 12 nautical mile radius, and provides screening and scoping opinions to assist applicants' EIA preparation and assessment of sustainable developments, which are typically large scale, including offshore renewables and major infrastructure projects. Screening and scoping opinions are provided at the request of the developer and are not mandatory. Members, in 2024, DAERA consulted on a review of marine licensing fees but did not proceed with hourly charges for EIA services, as that proposal was not supported by most consultees. In line with managing public money, the proposal for fixed fees in this document will enable full cost recovery for the provision of EIA screening and scoping opinions and reflect benchmarking with other administrations and average time spent by grade required to deliver opinions. Members, are you content to note, or as the document is embargoed until the 5th of June? I propose that if any member wishes it to be discussed further, we will have to return to the matter at the meeting on the 11th of June. So members, content? Okay, happy enough to note it? Okay. Agenda item 10 then is correspondence. Members, the correspondence memo starts at page 255 of the pack. I will highlight a few items and seek agreement that the others are actioned as the memo. Are members agreed? Okay, then I'm going to go to 10.3, refer to page 289 of the pack, to a memo from the clerk to the Committee for Finance regarding guidance to departments in absence of budget for 26-27. If you have any comments, you can tend to note. 10.6, I refer you to the pack at page 317, the notification on the Sustainable Energy Communities NI conference on Monday the 8th of June in the Long Gallery. A link to register interest has been provided. If you have any comments, you can tend to note individually. Thank you, members. Page 321, to an invitation from UFU to Arable NI 2026, which is an on-farm knowledge transfer and arable industry networking event, which is on Wednesday the 6th of June. Sorry, Wednesday the 3rd of June. If you have any comments, you can tend to reply individually to the invitation. Thank you, members. 10.8 referred to the pack starting on page 323 for correspondence dated the 22nd of May from an individual regarding small to medium anaerobic digestion bioalgae and rural renewable energy opportunities in Northern Ireland. If you have any comments, content to note. Thank you, members. Okay, the forward work programme is agenda 11, it's at page 40 of your table papers. Are you content that it's published? Number 12 then, are you, any other business, members? Okay. Agenda item 13, date and time, place of next meeting. So the next meeting will be at 10 a.m. on Thursday, the 4th of June, in room 21, Parliament Buildings. And then the AD stakeholder event will take place from 5 to 7 in the Stormont Hotel. Members, please arrive from 4:30 onwards. The format will be similar to the NAP event, with 2 roundtable sessions on opportunities and challenges, then a refreshment break, followed by a feedback session. To date, we have 30 attendees from a balanced range of organisations. We have sent out the invitation to people who have indicated previously that they would be interested, to try and ensure that we include them in the event. So members, that's now the meeting concluded. Thank you so much.
Committee Room 21. Sound.